Welcome to Alan Skorsky Reports. I'm Alan Skorsky. As the insanity revolving Israel's war to defeat Hamas and rescue the hostages continues to grow day by day, many of us keep asking ourselves, how did we get here? How did we get to a point that Israel, the lone democracy in the Middle East, whose civilians were savagely murdered on October 7th, and whose kidnapped hostages are still being held in the hells of Gaza tunnels for almost 2 years, how did we get to a point where Israel and its government have become the war criminals, while Hamas and their supporters are being viewed as activists seeking justice? How many people even remember the names Kfir Bibas, Ariel and Shiri Bibas? How many people would know who I'm talking about if I said the names Rom Braslovski or Evyatar David? All you have to do is turn on the news or go to your favorite social media platform to see that Israel is starving innocent Gazan civilians, including many children. And if you need evidence that children are starving, the New York Times will be happy to provide a front-page photo of a child with a genetic disease which causes him to look skeletal and report this as a victim of Israeli war crimes. How did we get here? If you ask me, I'll tell you that American Jewry has failed in its mission to support Israel and the Jewish people. But if you ask today's guest, someone a lot smarter than I am, and certainly more connected to the Israeli government than I'll ever be, Ruthie Blum, who is a former advisor at the office of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who is an award-winning columnist and a senior contributing editor at JNS, and co-host with Ambassador Mark Regev of the JNS TV podcast, Israeli Undiplomatic. In a recent column featured in JNS, Ruthie penned a column titled Hasbara and the Traitors Among Us, where Ruthie calls out people like Israel's Channel 12 anchorwoman, Yanit Levy, who accused the Israeli government of a moral failure rather than a PR failure, where she calls out former corrupt Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert, who said this was an illegitimate war being waged by Netanyahu for personal and political reasons. And she calls out award-winning novelist David Grossman, who said that the images he sees on the news justify accusing Israel of genocide. Ruthie, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us today from Israel.
Happy to be with you, Alan, despite the circumstances.
Despite the circumstances. So first of all, I am so glad that you wrote this column. When I saw the headline, Hasbara and the Traitors Amongst Us, I immediately got my rush because this is what's been driving me nuts. Again, I'm in America, so you've got your leftists in Israel. I've got the failure of American Jewry here in America. So let me ask you a question. Again, I've got so many to ask of you. In your column, you also reference the former heads of the Shin Bet, the Mossad, Israeli military, and of course they have so much credibility because former head of Mossad, Shin Bet. And who am I to criticize them? I'm here in America. These people have served to save Israel. So here's my first question. Israel has always had its share of leftists who always try to take you down. What has made this time worse than any other?
Well, in the first place, up until 1977, the left was in power in Israel, and so every single one of the former prime ministers, generals, etc., throughout Israel's history, up until that point, had been hawkish. Many of them were socialists, of course, as Israel was a really heavily socialist country, but they were all hawkish where foreign policy and the military were concerned. After 1977, when Menachem Begin came to power, they went crazy, basically. They felt as though the riffraff had taken over. These were the elites. These were the authors and the poets and the musicians. And, and in Israel, unlike in America, let's say in America, where the military today is a voluntary military. In Israel, everybody is drafted. But the highest ones, and because of that, everybody's a soldier here or a reservist. And the highest ranking ones also are the most educated. So, as was in the past.
Right.
So, what you had was a whole elite class that was also military. That, as I said, it's very different from the United States, where you can have a military class that isn't that aren't writers and musicians and etc. Anyway, they all went crazy after Menachem Begin came to power, and in those last decades, they have really been trying desperately to shift back to regain power. And a couple of times they managed to create a government here and there where they were in power. For example, for a few minutes, I would say Ehud Barak became prime minister, etc. However, the culture of Israel, the electorate changed greatly. And why did it change? It didn't change because it's a bunch of riffraffs. It changed because all Israelis woke up to the fact that the word peace only brings on bloodshed, and that every single land for peace deal with the so-called Palestinians resulted in many, many murders of Israelis, suicide bombings, etc. And over the years, even former leftists moved to the right, saying, you know what, this is just not possible. The Oslo Accords were a failure. The Gaza disengagement was a failure. The withdrawal from Lebanon was a failure, more like a retreat with our tail between our legs from Lebanon was a failure. And so what happened is that the Israeli voters vote to the right, and the elite class still is on the left. And I would say that's very much like the United States. You know, Trump is a great example of that. The Americans are not that far left and woke, and they've had it. And that explains why Trump is yet again president after the Biden administration was a clone of the Obama administration, etc. So what you see is that there's a big distinction between the ballot box and the culture.
Okay, so that's really very intriguing. So you mentioned Menachem Begin, and I was in my head playing with if I would bring him up in this conversation. So I go back to the 80s because I'm 62, and the 80s were the best decade. I remember that administration. Menachem Begin was prime minister. Ariel Sharon was defense minister. Yitzhak Shamir was foreign minister. And Bibi Netanyahu was the ambassador to the UN. And he was on Nightline almost every night with Ted Koppel. And talk about Hezbollah and PR. I mean, you couldn't get anybody better. But of course, today, you've got cable news, you've got social media. So Hezbollah, it doesn't even matter anymore. And you mentioned in the closing of your column, what good does it have to have Hezbollah or PR if our own people are turning against us? And I'll give you just one example. One of my favorite people now is Shabbos Kestenbaum, biggest rock star right now in America. He's in his 20s, I think. He's spoken before the Trump administration, before Netanyahu and his cabinet, and he laid out a whole list of things that the Israeli government has to do. And this is something that you addressed, actually. He said that the Israeli government has to fund a professional PR team to respond to all of these attacks. But as you close out your column, you point out very correctly, what good does it do to have a great Hezbollah if our own people are turning against us? Which brings us to where we are today. We can have a Shabbos Kestenbaum, a Ruthie Blum, a Douglas Murray, Mossab Hassan Youssef, but they can't go up against what we are being bombarded with today. So again, it comes back to how did we get to where we are today with Europe turning against us, the unions everywhere turning against us? How do we even begin to have a concept of how to turn things around, if it's even possible?
Okay, well, first of all, it's interesting because Prime Minister Netanyahu gave two press conferences yesterday. one in the afternoon in English to the foreign media, and one in the evening in Hebrew. The press conferences were very different because the focus, especially what the journalists wanted to know, the questions were different, and the I would say emphasis was different, though he made the same point about where he's headed in Gaza. And in his Hebrew press conference, he was asked, how come, you have such a dysfunctional, you don't have a Hasbara department anymore in the prime minister's office, etc. And he said, he basically said, okay, I'm paraphrasing, give me a break, okay? That's old bureaucracy nonsense from, the 80s, he said.
Right.
We're in a new world right now. We have bots and we have social media. We're bombarded. We need new strategies. It's not enough to, have, spokespeople who are funded by the prime minister's office or on the payroll. And by the way, I totally agree with that because when I worked, even now, when you say that I used to be at the prime minister's office, when I'm interviewed, you can see that the people commenting on the interviews will say things like, well, of course she's saying that. She was on the payroll of the prime minister. So it actually is less effective than when Douglas Murray or any other person, it's not that he's doing PR for Israel. Right. He believes in the cause. He believes in Israel's in the justice of Israel's cause. And all the people who do that, and that's Alan Dershowitz. There are many, many people. Yosef Haddad, there are Israelis and there are people outside of Israel. Richard Kemp. There are just many, many excellent, excellent ones. And they're not on Netanyahu's payroll, and that's better that they're not. Right. So, and also governments are inefficient. Constantly to say the government should do this and the government should do that. That's ridiculous. Okay. The governments, the less they do, the better. Now we need the government to make big decisions like what's going on in the war. And you need the government, you need transportation across the country, etc. But wherever the government is able to step aside, it's better.
No, absolutely. I agree with this. And here's also what's very aggravating. One of the biggest schmucks in podcast TV is Piers Morgan. One of the most insincere and disingenuous people you're ever going to have. He's had Douglas Murray. He's had Richard Kemp. He's had the best of the best. Clearly and articulately present why Israel is a good guy here. But that doesn't stop him from bringing on Peter Beinart and the next crew, because for him, he is the Jerry Springer of this news thing. He just wants the mud fighting. He doesn't care. Now again, he's just one person, but he and so many, they have their followers, and it gets repeated all over again on the news. So now, which brings me now to Europe, our so-called European allies. As again, you mentioned, your column basically covered everything that I would ever want to talk about. Okay, so France, of course, Macron is a feckless coward. We always knew that. In Britain, you've got Starmer. Australia, goodbye. Canada, the days of, what's his face? Oh, come on. Stephen Harper.
Harper, yeah.
Right, okay. It's all gone. So the headline and all their press conferences, we will recognize Palestine. Of course, we're all horrified by this. But when you read the column, it says, well, Hamas is going to have to demilitarize. I mean, they laid out all the conditions that the PA will never, ever agree to. So then brings me then, why the hell are you even opening your mouth? Because with your headlines, with that one statement alone, even if it'll never happen, you've given Hamas the moral victory. They say, you see, October 7th was a good thing. And then when Marco Rubio comes out and says, because of what France did, now they no longer negotiate to release the hostages. So these people have done nothing good, only damage. And even with their promises, it's still empty because the PA will never go along with it.
Well, that's true. But, they have a reason. Those European countries and Canada, Australia, those leaders' reason for doing that is to signal to their Islamist voters that they're on their side. That's what it is. It does, because it actually has no meaning. They can't just recognize Palestinian statehood. First of all, the Palestinians never wanted a state. Okay, all they want to do is destroy Israel. They never wanted a state. Every time they were offered one, they did. The point is, they don't want one. Actually, Palestinian Authority chairman Mahmoud Abbas, his whole, let's say, legitimacy comes from striving for statehood,
Right.
not for having a state. And he doesn't want the responsibility of a state. He what he does is he funds terror. Now it's true that his party Fatah is rivaled with Hamas, and so he's not happy about Hamas victories. That's, by the way, why he hasn't held an election in, I don't know, 20 years or 16 years, whatever it is, because he knows that Hamas will win in Judea and Samaria the way it won in Gaza. So he's not allowing elections. Having said that, he supported October 7th, the massacre. He funds terrorists. He gives stipends, monthly stipends to terrorists and their families. So, and raises children on the same textbooks as Hamas. The textbooks are, math classes. If you killed 2 Jews and you killed 2 more Jews, how many Jews did you kill altogether? That kind of thing. So the point is that anybody, you don't need to know Arabic to be able to know this, especially today with ChatGPT. It has a great translation app, and it's very easy to read exactly what everybody is saying. We also have both Memory Middle East Media Research Institute and Palestinian Media Watch, both of which monitor everything that comes out of the Arab world and the Palestinian media. And it's very clear what they say. You don't need to be a Mideast expert to read it. And that's what's so disturbing about these Western leaders who they don't really care. And then the reason that we then say, well, it must be anti-Semitism is precisely because it's a double standard. Any other country, conflict, etc., is treated very differently. They're treated differently from the way Israel is treated. Do you know, for example, if you take Ukraine and Russia, you know that many Ukrainian children have been abducted by Russia. I'm sure many because they're orphaned because of Russian attacks.
Yeah, it's a 3-year war.
They've basically stolen Ukrainian children. Ukrainians are in desperate straits, with the war. And guess what the Ukrainians do? They say, we're going to fight till the end. We're going to win. We're going to fight. They don't take to the streets and say, end the war, give Russia whatever it wants, right? And the world doesn't say, Ukraine, end the war, give Russia what it wants. That's just one tiny example where, this lie about Israel purposely starving the Gazans, which, by the way, Hamas was trying to purposely starve the Gazans, and Israel keeps trying to feed them and try not to feed Hamas because Hamas takes the food and sells it at exorbitant prices and keeps itself in business. But having said that, when, that this idea, this campaign, it's completely false that Israel is committing all these war crimes. All over the world, there is actual starvation going on. Do you hear any of these people? Do you hear the New York Times splashing on its front cover pictures of Sudanese? Do you see that? No. Again, Israel is treated to a different standard. And according to the international, what's it called? The IHRA definition, it's called International Holocaust.
Remembrance.
Remembrance Alliance definition.
Right.
Treating Israel and Jews to a different standard from everyone else constitutes anti-Semitism.
Now, you mentioned Memory and Palestinian Media Watch. Those are 2 groups whose names I mention with almost every interview. Because, as you said, they point out everything. If we didn't have any Hezbollah, if we had no spokespeople, they tell you themselves. Do you know how many imams we have in America saying, death to the Jews are a cancer, death to America? And you think that somehow we need to educate these people, but it's right here, and yet we're welcoming them more into our country. They have taken over the Democratic Party. You see this Ro Khanna, and he's a Democrat from California. He's urging the Trump administration. I think I read that he had 11 or 12 Democrats signing on a letter that we need to follow France, Australia, and Britain because we shouldn't be isolated. Of course, you know all about Mamzer Mamdani in New York. In Minnesota, you've got another guy from Sudan running for mayor who recently received the endorsement from the Minnesota Democratic Party. So this is the direction that right now America is heading into, and they're telling us what they're doing. So now here's another thing that also makes me laugh. And again, you're right that France and Britain, they've got their very large Muslim populations. But here's something that was funny. France recently said they're going to admit Gazan refugees into their country. Now, why Egypt and Jordan aren't taking them in? Okay, because France doesn't have enough problems, right? Blowing up rock concerts. But then one of the people they took in was a student who got into a prestigious French university. They found that her social media was replete with anti-Semitism. We go, that's the end of the program. And I'm thinking,
Right.
did you just wake up? You're shocked? This is what they've been doing all along. You've been calling for recognition of Palestine. You've slammed Israel. And this is what you finally wake up to? And then, of course, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that that's why Egypt doesn't want them.
Right.
Egypt, I mean, that's another thing. All these years, all right, Egypt has a border with Gaza, and everyone accused Israel of laying siege to Gaza, and there were flotillas, and we have to go to Gaza, and we have to go to Gaza. Nobody mentioned that Egypt has a border with Gaza. And Egypt was flooding tunnels, and Egypt was putting up bigger and bigger walls to prevent Gazans from getting there. But what Egypt did allow was the other direction. They allowed weapons and all kinds of like concrete to go
Right.
through. I'm sure it was because that border guards were being bribed by Hamas terrorists and being paid money to let materials go through. But even during this war, as Egypt plays so-called moderator, along with Qatar, again, moderator, though Qatar is Hamas and funds Hamas, etc. Egypt this whole time would not let Gazans who wanted to leave go into Egypt or even the Sinai, which is empty, and let them take refuge. You know, many Ukrainians left Ukraine. It's a war zone, and it's perfectly all right. Women and children, non-combatants leave war zones all the time. When Israel says, okay, let them leave, we're accused of ethnic cleansing or something. So whatever Israel does, it can't win in this respect. But that's why it's imperative for Israel to actually win on the battlefield. I know that people say, the information war is just as important. And it may be, and I don't know what the solution is. I know with social media, we do what we can, and I do what I can. But the truth is, I care about victory on the battlefield because all this other stuff is actually noise.
Right.
And what counts is defeating these bloodthirsty monsters who rape, behead, burn babies. They're proud of it. They filmed themselves
Right.
doing it. They champion it. We have got to rid Gaza of those monsters. And the only reason it's taking us this long is because two reasons. We are being extremely careful not to kill non-combatants on the one hand, and on the other, not to accidentally cause the death of hostages.
Right.
So we've been doing all this very precise, taking precise measures and being accused of carpet bombing, of indiscriminate killing, of targeting children, of targeting journalists. Of course, those journalists participated in the October 7th massacre, etc. Doctors, again, hostages who were released. Some of the women, they were in homes of doctors, journalists, kept by UNRWA employees. So, but nobody's listening. There's so much noise.
Right.
But again, Israeli leftists who hate Netanyahu more than they care about the country are aiding and abetting the enemies. And that's why I call them traitors, because
Right.
that's what I believe treason is.
No, listen, I agree with you. And again, I think American Jews are worse because at least your people live there and they've got a different trauma. We're here, how dare we criticize the Israeli government? And they use Bibi as the whipping boy. So let me ask you a question, and because we've got a little bit of time left. Um, Israel's going, now Bibi is talking about one last push, Operation opening a can of whoop ass on Gaza. That's the name I made up. He didn't use that name.
Good
Um,
name.
okay, so he's going to go in there now. Um, and again, I fully support it. Of course, I support it. You know what he's doing. But I also understand why some Israelis, they're a lot of the soldiers, they're mentally and physically drained.
No, no, no.
Am I
Let me
wrong?
stop you. Let me stop you right there.
Okay.
That's one of those narratives
Yeah.
that the New York Times and the Haaretz and a lot of the Israelis who are, in the war Israelis keep pumping out. It is not true. You speak to any reservist, it's true. Listen, my own son was in Gaza so many days and
Right.
he lost his business and his kids were, excuse me,
Yeah.
kids were traumatized and all that. And he lost many of his friends who were killed by Hamas in Gaza. They are not weary. Many of them are have lost limbs fighting,
Right.
and those ones are in rehab, saying if they would go back if they could, if they had both legs, they would go back there. Most of the reservists, yes, they're tired because they're fighting, but what they say to Netanyahu is, finish the job. Let's not leave it undone. Let's not let all the lives of of our um, our colleagues, our fellow soldiers who fell, let that not be in vain. Okay, do not believe that everybody's weary and tired. It is not true. Of course, there are some who are tired, and yes, there is PTSD. But anybody who's constantly focusing on that has an agenda. It's just not true. And the latest, there is a big dispute about what Netanyahu is about to do. Of course, the leftists are saying it's terrible, he's going to kill all the hostages and blah, blah, blah. But the people on his side and the hostage families who believe that Hamas has to be defeated, not kowtowed to, there
Right.
are hostage families like those. I know the New York Times doesn't like to interview them. They are upset because they fear that Netanyahu was a little vague about whether, after he goes into Gaza City, after it's evacuated they go in there to clean out the last strongholds in Gaza City, and then in the central camps and the Moasi. Okay, first there's Gaza City, and then there's the other side. That's the last 25% of Gaza that Israel has not managed to clean up of terrorists. They asked him, they keep saying, wait, and what if Hamas suddenly comes out and says, okay, we'll give you 10
Right.
hostages. Are you going to stop again,
Right.
retreat again, let them rearm again and booby trap the tunnels again and send the reservists home to go back again? And he was not clear on that. He would not give a straight answer. And I know why he wouldn't, because he doesn't want to commit to saying no,
Right.
especially, you can save some lives. And he certainly doesn't want to commit to saying yes, because he doesn't want to encourage Hamas to say,
Right.
okay, we'll dick you around and then we'll offer you a couple of hostages or something. So he's in this tricky position. I think he was right not to give a straight answer to that. But people are worried in that respect. The reservists who are worried about that. Do we have to go in again and
Right.
again because Hamas is Hamas is sort of uh, it's got its cards. There is the hostages, got its leverage. It's completely decimated Hamas, of course,
Right.
but it's got that last thing, and Jews care about that. Every single human being, dead and alive. Okay, a lot of these hostage families have relatives whom they know are already dead, and they're still out protesting. They know they're dead. It's not a question.
Right.
They saw them dead on October 7th, and they're still treating the dead bodies as though they're living, and that's what Jews do. And I do not criticize them for that. I do, however, criticize them for handing Hamas, a gift on a silver platter in that form of saying all we care about is the hostages, and we'll do anything to get them.
Ruthie, I am so glad I asked you that question because that really needed clarification. And it wasn't that I don't know if I was falling for it, but I could certainly understand a 3-year war where people just, or not 3-year war, but almost 2 years where people just, they're mentally fatigued. So I'm glad that I asked. I'm glad that you were able to clarify that. Ruthie, it's always an honor to have you. Continued success on your podcast and all the work that you do at JNS. God bless you. We need you.
Thank you so much, Alan. It was a pleasure.